1982 saw the release of The Thing, a film largely panned by critics on release, which resulted in a poor box office showing. But while this film wasn't exactly the hit that John Carpenter deserved, over the years, this horror gem cemented itself as an all-time classic. The film's incredible practical effects are legendary, and not only that, the film is actually fucking awesome overall. It did take some time to catch on as a movie deserving to be remembered. However, slowly but surely, this little monster movie was able to take over and be recognised as one of the greatest horror films ever made. 20 years later, we got the video game sequel, also titled The Thing. This game would look to continue the story straight after the events of the first film, show us what happens next. So let's see if it's any good. Alright, so if you haven't seen The Thing, do yourself a favour and go and watch it. Otherwise some of this probably won't make any sense. So we start off brutal straight off the bat with an opening cutscene of two blokes getting an unfriendly welcome by old mate over here, after which we cut to our character introduction. We are Blake, and after discovering the base we're flying over is completely destroyed, we move down to investigate to see if we can find anything. Straight away it's into tutorials, including how the squad system works and control systems, which I immediately had to go to the options menu and change because the standard controls were completely fucked. We managed to get some power on, but things aren't getting any better, and you have to be careful venturing out into the freezing temperatures. Eventually we come across the partly built spaceship from the film, as well as one of MacReady's tapes, but we ain't got time to dawdle, so it's off to the infirmary. Things there go from fucked to super fucked, with this guy looking like he's had a pretty big night. And we also find Charles from the movie, who seems to have died from exposure.
And what appears to be
one body and what?
in some kind of unidentified craft. It looks, well, like a UFO.
After we tell the Colonel about the UFO, he gets us to plant C4 around the base and get out of there. This first level's pretty effective in setting the tone early on, even without putting you in a combat situation. It builds up well to the horror that's going to follow. We go to meet up with the other team that's about, only now we're going solo. We run into a fella, Carter, who's in the middle of what look like some pretty hectic shit. He initially ain't too keen on us, but he comes around when we give him a gun and a medkit. We also come across another Alpha team member who's just fucking kicking back in the ice block room where the thing initially broke out from. Like, mate, are you sure you're alright? Anyway, we can't contact anyone on the radio, so I guess we're winging it. Shit really starts to ramp up here, and we finally start to deal with some of the creatures. They're dealt with easy enough using the machine gun, however ammo is easy to chew through quickly. The next guy we meet up with is a bit more hesitant to team up, and threatens to cook us up if we don't do a blood test to prove we aren't one of the monsters. So we run back out, deal with a few more little shits, and soon enough we're back to old mate.
Do it. We'll soon know, one way or another.
Now I'm gonna show you what I already know.
Hey, you said that line! Anyway, of course we're alright, but it turns out the other dudes we're with are fucked, and, you know, they turn on us and chaos ensues. Now these fights can be tough, as you have to put the big things down with fire or else they'll keep coming. Once they're dealt with though, we run off with Pierce, only to somehow immediately lose him. Like, mate, you should have this bloke tied to your fucking hip at this point. We find this other fella who's a bit more clever than the others, and throwing grenades at anything that moves. We get to ask him about what's happening, but the news ain't good.
Look, man, me and Williams were tracking this weird animal through the base, and we lost him in the storm, and then we ran into a Swede.
Norwegian.
Yeah, the Norwegian guy. Well, he started shouting and attacking me, and I started chasing him, and I lost him in the storm.
What about Williams?
I lost him too.
Mate, I take it back. You sound like you're going to be as useless as everyone else. The mission continues, and man, that pool table is completely ruined. The next survivor, Williams, is suitably paranoid, but we need him to get to the comms room, so we agree to go on a kill everything in the other room then come back mission. This is where the game starts to throw you in some hairy situations, as the big guys require you to wear down their health and burn them, which means you're busy running around the room trying to keep them back with the flames while also trying to not fucking kill yourself or your own dudes. It's pretty important to get the balance right. Anyway, we get to the comms room, we deal with a few big boys, and then we end up in some pretty isolated section looking for an emergency radio that turns into this battle sequence reminiscent of the house section in Resident Evil 4. This is mostly just shooting a bunch of little dudes until the big boys roll up and then you know it's about to be over. We see a Norwegian survivor run off in the distance, so it's time to chase after him, and of course my medic decides he wants to be a thing along the way. Fucking prick. Anyway, this guy really doesn't want to be friends, so it's gonna take some persistence. We run up to where we think he's gonna be, but fucking somehow it's Pierce, the bloke we lost before, and he's apparently infected, so he decides to shoot himself, which is pretty gnarly.
If you want a job done right, you gotta do it yourself.
Even in the warehouse, we run into a different bloke, but he reckons the Norwegian's downstairs. We head down, and after our guy decides he's also a thing, we run into our Norwegian, who I'm starting to suspect isn't human, but I don't really know what Norwegians look like, so who am I to judge? Now, this boss fight was tough without many health items, and can feel a little unfair until you work out a pattern, but overall I'll give it a not totally fucked out of 10. Anyway, we end up in the submersible, which is some sort of lab where they seem to be doing some fucked experiments, because fuck making sense, that sounds cool. We ride through for a while solo while trying not to burn our ass off, and after we find some sus bloke hanging out who isn't infected, we head deeper into the lab and rescue a scientist named Faraday, played by none other than Jono himself.
It's you! You're him! You're Tony Randall!
Our victory lap is cut short, however, as we're confronted by Colonel Whitley, who is up to some pretty shady shit. We're incapacitated and taken to a separate lab, and in the meantime, Jono is trying to stop some mischievous shit from continuing.
I don't need your help.
Not Jono! We eventually wake up, and it's time to get the fuck out of there. We managed to raid the armory and pick up a few stragglers along the way. I thought it was cool seeing the aftermath of the virus getting out in this lab. It was pretty awesome. The Colonel's soldiers aren't too keen to see us, but we take them out with relative ease. Oh, I love a good head pop. For a while, you're consistently with a squad with very few turncoats, and you're largely taking on soldiers and getting through areas easy enough, except for when a squad mate does some stupid shit. You fucking donkey. We eventually do get separated for another boss fight, which goes better than the last time, seeing as I actually had something to hide behind. We turn on the power to the elevator, but we've got to get out of there quickly as this place is going to blow. We get to the elevator in time, but our mates decided to not even try and get blown the fuck up. We make our way through a warehouse to get some explosives, as we need to blow up a few cargo planes.
Seriously.
Who's the cargo for?
I don't know, but it sure ain't the Red Cross. If Whitley's behind this, that cargo's gotta be destroyed.
How funny would it be if these were actually for the Red Cross? These planes are awfully underguarded, like I was able to walk through just a few guys to plant this shit. Anyway, we destroy the front wheels of the cargo planes and head back underground solo. Like fucking see you losers. Have fun freezing to death. This next section is pretty tedious and just chews through a shitload of ammo, so I was pretty happy for it to be over. From here, there's not a lot going on, except for some guy who tries to lure us into a room, only to try and trap us and kill us with some gas. After we catch up to him, there's another boss fight that took a few tries. Next thing you know, we're running out of the exploding base and running after the Colonel. When we do catch up to him, he basically says our efforts are for nothing, then rather than having a final showdown, he runs away again? Like, why? We end up chasing after him again and killing a bunch of guys, but then he ends up transforming into this huge beast, which does look pretty cool. I go into this expecting a pretty epic battle, and we even get a surprise guest on a chopper, which is then followed by a pretty underwhelming sequence that you'll knock out fairly quickly. After all that's out of the way, our mystery pilot tells us his name, MacCready, and we fly off into the distance.
R.J. MacCready, U.S. Outpost North 31.
Alright, so this story is a bit all over the place. Within the context of the movie, it doesn't make any sense, especially the ending. But as a silly extension of the movie, you can have a bit of fun with it. Anyway, let's see how the rest of it holds up. Now, being a game from 2002, you'll notice some layovers of old game design, with a little bit of modern stuff sprinkled in. The first thing you'll want to do, though, is change the bloody control layout, because the default controls are just fucked. I mean, you'd be able to make them work with some practice, but for me, the third option made the most sense. You'll quickly notice a couple of little quirks that made a little bit more sense for a 2002 third-person shooter. First off, the right analog stick not giving you the option to look up or down, with that only being possible by entering the first-person mode. This is pretty common to find in older games, with the first-person mode usually locking you in place when looking around. This is handy in combat to get a more accurate shot in, as the other classic mechanic is an auto-aim system that, depending on what you choose at the start of the game, can spray your shots quite a bit. Now, don't think this is going to be a bad thing, as I actually think it works quite well overall, and isn't too difficult to control. Also, you're left with a fair bit of ammo throughout the game, so you can usually be pretty confident using your weapon, because old school survival horror, this is not. It's pretty important to know what this game is going in for that reason, because if you're looking for a classic slow, moody Resident Evil style experience, it's just not what you're going to find. Despite having a slow build-up, which is excellent by the way, once the action starts to kick in, you'll be shooting everything that moves. You'll find a lot of these smaller enemies about, which are easy enough to handle, but anything else you're going to need fire, and lots of it. This is part of the combat that's quite interesting and easy to fuck up early on. You'll need to get their health right down and finish them off with a flamethrower, or incendiary grenade if you've got it, but it's pretty damn easy to get yourself caught in the flame while you're at it, so keeping a distance is a good idea. The monsters aren't too keen on running through flames to get to you, so it's often easiest to just set up a big wall of fire, bring down their health and then finish them off quickly, but be ready to mess this up a few times. Health drains super quickly in this game, and a few wrong moves can put you in a pretty bad position pretty quickly. Yeah, if you aren't near a batch of medkits, that is. That being said, the game isn't super hard once you nail down these aspects. On top of the monster enemies, you'll run into a fair few human enemies as well, which aren't super difficult to deal with, but are easily the weakest part of the game overall, and feel the most dated in terms of combat AI. You'll be dealing with a lot of them later in the game, and while it doesn't ruin the game or anything, there's definitely a lack of polish that makes it weaker than fighting the monsters. Something a bit more positive is the boss fights aren't complete shit. I know, right? You never really know what you're going to get with these types of games, so I was happy that they weren't completely broken. They could actually be a bit of a challenge in a way that made them satisfying to beat, once you find the best way of dealing with them, and they don't sour the experience of the game. Except for that last boss fight in the helicopter. I mean, what a fucking letdown. You think you're going to have this big epic battle, and while it all looks super cool, you're just shooting on a rail for a bit and then the game's over.
What the hell was that?
It just lacks any satisfying payoff, and it really underlines the almost amazing factor of the game. There's a lot of things that it gets right, but it's fumbles like these that just drag it down. With that in mind, one thing that the game is consistent with is the graphics, because for a licensed game released in 2002, this game looks really good. For this playthrough, I'm playing it on the 360, so the output is obviously going to be cleaner, and the game nails the cold, isolating atmosphere of the middle of Antarctica. The callbacks to the film are neat, and it's cool to find things referencing the '82 classic. I do wish Childs was at least alive when you found him though. I mean, surely they could have afforded Keith David for a few lines, right? Speaking of that though, the voice acting is pretty good, and given the era, the facial animations are pretty good as well.
I will be remembered as the first successful test subject.
No, not if I can help it.
I don't need your help.
Extending past the callbacks early on, you will be going through labs set up for experiments on the thing, and while they don't really make much sense with the story as a whole, the design of the labs are pretty neat. I especially like the section where you're captured and have all your weapons taken away. It feels like a neat puzzle where you're having to avoid the monsters, while also getting a team together and getting your hands on some guns. The whole team mechanic is a bit sloppy though, and will cause some frustration at times. What works is the item management, where you'll need to give your team weapons, ammo and health items while they tag along. You can give some basic orders, and at times certain members will be essential to get through areas if they have certain skills. Better keep an eye on them though, because at any time they may turn on you. And when I say any time, I mean it's completely fucking scripted. These tests you can use in the game are near useless. Team members can just seemingly disappear once you finish a level anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I like the ideas around these mechanics, and with a bit more polish it could have been amazing, but the stubborn side of it does start to creep in. Don't get me wrong, it's not completely broken, but there's certainly a bit more work that could have been done. But that basically could be said to sum up the game. So let's wrap this up with my final thoughts. Now, I went into this game with realistic expectations. I knew it wasn't going to be the best game ever made, but I must say I was pretty happy with what I got overall. There's a lot here to like. Once I got settled in and got used to the older style of gameplay, I actually had a lot of fun. I won't sit here and tell you it's perfect, there's definitely some glaring issues, but they're more minor annoyances than game-breaking problems. This game was solid, and I think it deserves a 7 out of 10. You won't be blown away and think it's the greatest action horror game ever made, but, you know, you're still in for a fun ride. Anyway, that's all from me today. I'll catch you next time.